People say some paintings don't just capture a face. They capture your soul. This one, it's been waiting for me for a very, very long time. Growing up, my grandmother always warned me about old houses. She'd say they hold memories like a sponge holds water, and sometimes, those memories are stained with something dark. I never really believed her. To me, an old house was just a place with character, a story waiting to be uncovered. So, when I found a beautiful, sprawling Victorian house for a steal, I signed the lease without a second thought. I imagined filling it with life, laughter, and light. I was young, optimistic, and completely unprepared for what was already living there, watching from the shadows. The house had a certain smell, a mix of old wood, dust, and something else. Something faintly metallic, like old coins or dried blood. But I brushed it off. It was the attic that truly called to me. The pull was irresistible, a siren song luring me up the creaking spiral staircase. The attic was a treasure trove of forgotten things, shrouded in cobwebs and bathed in the dim light filtering through a single grimy window. Cardboard boxes overflowed with yellowed letters, and old furniture hid under white sheets like sleeping ghosts. But in the far corner, something stood out. It was a large, ornate frame, leaning against the wall. Curiosity got the better of me. I pulled away the dusty cloth covering it, and a cloud of stale air billowed out, making me cough. And then I saw him. Staring back at me from the canvas was a man with a stern, unforgiving face. His eyes were cold, dark pools of shadow, and his lips were pressed into a thin, cruel line. A shiver, sharp and icy, ran down my spine. The air in the attic suddenly felt heavy, suffocating. I couldn't explain the feeling of pure dread that washed over me, but I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I was not alone. The man in the portrait was watching me. I quickly covered the painting back up, telling myself it was just my imagination running wild in a creepy old house. I tried to forget about it, busying myself with unpacking, but the image of those cold, dead eyes was seared into my mind. That night, the house began to whisper its secrets. The strangeness started subtly. I'd be downstairs, reading a book, and hear the distinct sound of slow, heavy footsteps pacing back and forth in the attic directly above me. I'd freeze, listening, my heart hammering against my ribs. But when I'd call out, the only reply was silence. Doors I knew I had closed would be found slightly ajar, just enough for someone or something to peer through the crack. My keys, which I always left on the hook by the door, would turn up on the kitchen counter. At first, I blamed it on my own forgetfulness, on the house settling, on anything that made sense. But then came the portrait. I couldn't stay away from the attic. Something kept drawing me back, a morbid fascination I couldn't fight. Every time I went up there, I'd find the cloth covering the painting had been moved, sometimes just a corner lifted, other times pulled completely off. And his eyes, they were different each time. They seemed to follow my every move, their painted gaze burning into me. One afternoon, I stood before it, my arms crossed, trying to rationalize the fear away. As I stared, I could have sworn the corner of his mouth twitched, a fleeting, almost imperceptible smirk. I ran out of the attic, slamming the door shut, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I was no longer just scared, I was terrified. The man in the painting wasn't just an image on canvas. He was aware, and he was enjoying my fear. I had to know who he was. My nights were sleepless, filled with the sounds of creaking floorboards and what sounded like faint, raspy laughter echoing from the attic. I spent days buried in the local library's archives, sifting through old town records and newspaper clippings, looking for anything about my house. Finally, I found it, an article from the late 1800s, with a faded photograph that made my blood run cold. It was him, the man from the portrait. His name was Elias Thorne. The newspaper called him the Silent Butcher of Elm Street. He had been a recluse, a man whose quiet demeanor hid a monstrous secret. Over a decade, he had been responsible for the disappearances of several people in the town. The article detailed how the police finally found the horrific evidence of his crimes hidden within the walls of the house, my house. Elias was captured and, according to the law at the time, was held captive in the very attic where he had committed his atrocities, awaiting his execution. The attic wasn't just an attic. It was his prison, his final domain, and that portrait. It was painted of him during his confinement, just weeks before he was hanged. The artist was said to have gone mad shortly after completing it, claiming the painting had stolen a piece of Elias's wicked soul. I dropped the newspaper, my hands trembling. I wasn't living in a house with a memory. I was living in a tomb with a monster. The knowledge changed everything. The subtle disturbances escalated into outright torment. The whispering became clearer, hissing my name from the shadows. I'd feel an icy touch on my neck when no one was there. The presence in the house was no longer just watching. It was feeding on my fear, growing stronger, and the portrait was its anchor. I felt it pulling at me, a constant thrumming in the back of my mind, tempting me to go back to the attic, to stand before him, to just look. I felt my own thoughts slipping, replaced by dark, intrusive impulses. I knew I had to destroy it. I couldn't just leave it for someone else to find. One night, armed with a can of lighter fluid and a box of matches, I stormed up to the attic. The air was thick and glacial. The portrait was uncovered, waiting for me. His eyes seemed to glow with a malevolent light, his painted smirk wider than ever. He knew what I was coming to do. "Get out of my house," I screamed, my voice shaking as I doused the canvas with the flammable liquid. I struck a match, the small flame dancing defiantly in the oppressive darkness. I tossed it onto the portrait. The flames erupted with a roar, engulfing the canvas in a hungry orange blaze. I watched, relief flooding through me, as the stern face of Elias Thorne began to blacken and peel away. But then, something impossible happened. As the fire consumed the painting, the eyes, those two dark, hateful points of energy, didn't burn. Instead, they seemed to lift from the canvas, melting into the shadows of the attic wall. And from those shadows, a deep, guttural laugh echoed through the room, a sound of pure, triumphant evil that shook the very foundations of the house. The fire died down, leaving nothing but a charred, empty frame. But he wasn't gone. I knew he was just free. A few months later, a new tenant moves into the old Victorian house on Elm Street. He's excited about the space, the character, the history. Drawn by an unexplainable urge, he makes his way up the creaking spiral staircase to the attic. It's dusty, filled with forgotten things, but in the far corner, something stands out. Leaning against the wall is a large, ornate frame. As he gets closer, he sees the painting inside is pristine, untouched by time. It's a portrait of a man with a stern, unforgiving face and cold, dark eyes. The new tenant feels a sudden, inexplicable chill. He doesn't know it yet, but the portrait has been waiting for him, and it always will be. Story to have you ever seen a painting that just feels alive? One where the eyes seem to follow you, no matter where you stand. Well, hold on to that thought, because today we're diving into the story of a portrait that did more than just follow. It changed. This is the chilling tale of the smiling girl. Everyone loved the painting, until the smile changed. It was a masterpiece, renowned for the enigmatic, almost secretive smile on the young girl's face. Our story begins with a talented young artist named Alara, who had just spent her life savings to acquire it. She was obsessed with its beauty, the delicate brushstrokes, the life captured in the girl's eyes. But as she brought it back to her small town, she noticed the whispers. The locals would hurry past her studio, casting nervous glances. "That painting, it's not right," an old shopkeeper muttered to her one day. "There's a sadness behind that smile, a darkness." Alara dismissed it as superstitious nonsense. To her, it was just a beautiful piece of art. She hung it in the most prominent spot in her studio, where the morning light would hit it just right. The girl in the painting seemed to glow, her smile a beacon of mystery and grace. For the first few days, Alara was in heaven, studying its every detail, trying to unravel the secrets of the master who painted it. But the town's unease was a seed of doubt, and soon she would learn why they were so afraid. The first time it happened, Alara thought she was imagining things. She had just finished a frustrating day, a commission gone wrong, and she slumped into her chair, staring at the painting. The girl's smile seemed different, tighter, almost mocking. Alara blinked, shaking her head. It must be the light, or her exhaustion playing tricks on her. But the next morning, after receiving a letter with good news, she glanced at the portrait and swore the smile had softened, widened just a fraction, as if sharing her joy. A cold dread began to creep up her spine. It wasn't just in her head. The painting was reacting to her life, to her emotions. The unsettling feeling grew stronger. The shadows in the corners of the canvas seemed to deepen and writhe when she wasn't looking directly at them. At night, a new terror began. Faint whispers, like the rustling of dry leaves, would echo through her quiet studio. The sounds always seemed to come from the direction of the painting. One night, she crept closer, her heart pounding in her chest, and heard a single, clear word drift from the canvas. Help? Alara's world, once filled with color and creativity, was now consumed by a single, terrifying question: what was trapped inside that beautiful frame? Driven by a mix of terror and morbid curiosity, Alara knew she had to understand the painting's origins. Her research led her to a dusty old archive, where she found the personal diary of the original painter, a man named Julian Vance. The pages were filled with frantic, spidery handwriting. Julian wrote of a young girl named Annalise, his model for the portrait. He described her as full of life, her smile a source of pure light. But the diary took a dark turn. Julian confessed his obsession with capturing her essence, not just on canvas, but forever. The town had accused Annalise of witchcraft after a series of misfortunes, and in a fit of mob hysteria, she was unjustly murdered. In his grief and madness, Julian performed a dark ritual, a forbidden rite to bind her spirit to the painting, believing he could preserve her forever. But the ritual was flawed. Annalise's soul was trapped, twisted by anger and sorrow. The diary's final, terrifying entries revealed the truth. The painting wasn't just a prison, it was a predator. It needed to feed on life force to sustain its form, slowly, imperceptibly, absorbing the vitality of anyone who possessed it. Alara looked at her own pale hands, the dark circles under her eyes. She hadn't just bought a painting, she had bought her own tomb. The realization came too late. The whispers were no longer faint. They were a constant, desperate chorus in her mind. The shadows in the painting weren't just moving anymore. They were reaching out, tendrils of dark paint slithering beyond the frame and onto the wall of her studio. A strange, irresistible pull emanated from the canvas, tugging at her very soul. She felt her energy draining away, a profound weakness settling deep into her bones. One evening, as she stood frozen in terror before it, the painting began to ripple like water. Annalise's face distorted, her smile widening into a horrifying, silent scream. Alara felt herself being pulled forward, her feet dragging against the floor. It was like fighting against a powerful current. She could see her own reflection appearing on the canvas, superimposed over the girl's face. The two images were merging. She screamed, clawing at the air, fighting to break free from the invisible force. Her reflection in the painting began to smile, but it wasn't her smile. It was a cold, sinister, triumphant grin. Her studio, her life, her own face began to fade as the painted world consumed her. The struggle was brief, and then silence. The next morning, the sun streamed into the empty studio. Everything was just as Alara had left it. Her brushes were on the table, a half-finished canvas sat on a nearby easel, and on the main wall, the painting of the smiling girl hung serenely. But something was different. The girl in the portrait was gone. In her place was a new face, Alara's face. Her eyes, once full of life and artistic passion, were now captured in oil and pigment, vacant and hollow. And on her lips was a mysterious, knowing smile. A smile that seemed to say, "I'm waiting." The townspeople, who passed by the studio window would shudder. The new painting was even more unsettling than the last, because now, when the light hit it just right, they could swear the smile would change, just a little. And sometimes, late at night, a new, faint whisper could be heard from within the studio, a single, haunting word, "Help?"